Victoria had previously passed these around via email. Did everyone have a chance to review these? Was there any comments or questions or requested changes on the minutes?
Though I know he just had noted that he was sworn in the first meeting, but I think Terry Collins wanted to speak this last time we were here, so that's just why I noted it in there. But I could be mistaken.
All times.
Yes, okay.
Both times.
Yeah.
Oh, you're 2 times.
Yes.
I like that. All right, but that was good. Okay.
Bill, did the minutes come in an email?
It came in an email, yep.
Because I ended up with 2 copies of a memo, but I don't think I got it.
Oh, they were in there. Did we
Probably.
Have, did we have an extra? Yeah, they were attached to this. They should have been attached to this same email that had the memo in it.
Because yeah, I ended up with 2 copies of a memo. But I'll double check.
Okay.
I don't know if this is a typo. Victoria, but on the last page,
Yeah.
motion carried unanimously. It's just a dash 0.
Yeah.
Should be 7.
Oh, yes,
Yep.
yes. Thank you.
Turn, new style.
No.
Hey,
Thank you.
I think these are great. It's like, when you need to
I know, right? They're excellent. Excellent. All right. All right. Well, if there's no additional changes or suggestions, all right. Do I have a motion to accept the motions? Thank you.
Second.
I'm going to go with Sarah solely for the first and Chief Glidden for the second. All in favor of accepting the FCAB minutes from December 6th?
Oh, and,
All right, pass unanimously.
Just before we go further, we do have Ryan Mingo, one of our members who's participating remotely today. One housekeeping matter I wanted to address just at the outset is we're currently operating under the governor's executive order through March, which allows us to meet as a public body remotely. I anticipate that's probably going to be extended. I think we're in sort of a new way of life here post-COVID. But there's obviously no guarantees. Prior to those executive orders, prior to the pandemic, in order for a public body to allow for remote participation with some of its members, the chair, the director of the chair, would have to essentially allow it and then present it to the members of the board to take a vote that from time to time, when necessary, remote participation would be allowed for members. So we're covered today due to the executive order, but should that expire, if things change, I was wondering if the chair would potentially entertain a motion to allow members to participate remotely from now and into the future, should it be necessary. And so if we could address that, we'll be covered if anything happens with the executive order in the future. We can still have remote participation. Absolutely. Yep.
So the suggestion will be meeting in person, but if someone has to.
Like
meet
Ryan
remote.
today, yes, exactly. Like I said, it's really a non-issue today because we're operating under the executive order, but should that change in the future, this just would be a housekeeping thing that we would have, resolved.
It's sort of refreshing to meet in person as opposed to.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think that's our intention for the time
yeah.
being, so.
Absolutely.
But, this way, for today, Ryan's not going to affect us with the flu, and if
That's right.
folks are traveling in the future,
Yeah.
we'll have this at our disposal.
Any discussions about that? No. So should we do that today?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'll make a motion. I'll second.
So basically, the motion would be to allow for board members
Yep.
to participate remotely.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Any discussion on that? All right. All in favor of allowing board members to participate remotely in the future as needed?
Yep.
All right. Passes unanimously.
Thank you.
I think that's the last. Is that the last record?
Yeah, that was an unanticipated matter because Ryan came ill, so we try to accommodate him and appreciate obviously coming today.
All right, so the next order of business then is to chat with our subcommittee about their memo that they put together regarding frames and, excuse me, not frames and receivers, that's next, I'm getting ahead of myself, regarding long guns, rifles, and shotguns, and the issue with the firearms roster. So, Rich Garvey, you want to give us some
The subcommittee met two occasions. The second occasion was earlier this week, on Wednesday. Just looking at the minutes for the day, first time, whenever it was sometime in December. And during the first meeting, we had a general discussion about the issue. And we then asked Ryan, with his agreement, to draft a memo just outlining our discussion and what appeared to be sort of the direction of the subcommittee on this particular issue. It was distributed earlier this week, I believe, as part of the packet that we have. And we had a further discussion. And there was some post-one. I passed out one of the issues that we discussed was any other examples in chapter 135 that sort of suggests that, mostly for the term firearm, but just in general, it's happened with all legislation, that sometimes the use of the term X means X, but sometimes it means X minus Y or X plus Z. And I have come up with a few other examples. So there's something to consider. The full board is whether or not we can add anything to the memo. Just as further support to what our conclusion was the other day, that the term firearms for purposes of the approved firearm list the subcommittee group does not include long guns. I think the memo speaks for itself. We offer that for consideration.
I think the memo is great. I know I need some time to digest this, so I certainly don't want to take a vote on the memo this month.
No, I don't think
But yeah, but do we want to have a discussion?
That's the definition of firearm relative to the roster.
Relative to the approved roster.
Right.
In the relative to
It may, these few examples that I've come up with show that it may have a different meaning elsewhere, but we were focused on the use of the word, the expanded use of the word firearm as it relates to the roster only. We didn't render any opinion or discussion about whether it should or does not apply to any other roster or any other issue.
Is there any discussion about the memo? Well, I'm gonna read it before next month. You did a great job on that. Thank you all for meeting and putting this together. It's excellent.
Well, I thank Ryan for using all the agreements that put the discussion.
Well, Chief and Judge made it easy. They didn't put a lot of work into the research and thinking, so just putting their thoughts on paper.
You have any thoughts about it? Or? Like the chair said, we'll probably put this on. If there's going to be a vote on this next month, which we anticipate probably will be, it'll be noticed on the agenda so that everyone is aware if that's the case. It's not the case for today because we wanted to have the time to present the memo and discuss and listen to concerns. So if anyone has anything to add, now's the time, and if not,
Just have a related question. The secretary, would have the authority to change the name on the roster to make it more clear to understand that?
I would say yes. I would say absolutely yes. I don't see anything in either the current law or the prior laws that govern this that ties to a particular name. And Chief, you know how they were developed back in the early 2000s anyway.
And it's listed by name in the CMR.
Right, but that's us, and that's something we can do. We have to update the CMR anyway. And I also think to the provision that allows the secretary, sua sponte, on his own, the authority to amend any roster at any time. So to me, that also would support the position that the name of the roster could be changed.
Well, the reason I bring that up because it's a very complex issue. You don't have to spend a lot of time on it. You probably get it, but I'm not sure the general public would necessarily understand that. This is a firearm here, not over here, versus if the title of the roster was clearly whatever pistols and revolvers or handguns or whatever. It might be easier to understand.
So, or at the very least, some sort of notation, you know, and something that says secretary is determined that this roster.
Right.
Yeah, it's going to take some education. Depending upon how the context issue, but the old chapter 155. It's just a whole lot more. It's going to be just a little bit of a challenge as you get into it. It doesn't necessarily mean it here, but it seems to have that a little bit.
What's good? The good thing is, for roster purposes, not necessarily have to need to educate the entire community, but the dealers need to know. So you have, FRB has the ability to reach out to the dealers and say, here's what this means.
This is somewhat related to Judge something you just mentioned about on the footnote and sort of the definition of firearm, and this was explained, I think, fairly thoroughly in the memo. But given we are a public body here, and for record-keeping purposes, perhaps Judge, you could just elaborate a little bit about the research you did regarding sort of the definition of firearm and the qualification of that in Chapter 140.
I didn't take a totally deep dive on the legislative history research. The opportunity for the state house to see if there is anything. I mean, there's an internet searching legislative history research before. It's generally, I'm not being critical, but it's generally very limited in the country. That's the way the process is. But I did a detailed comparison of Chapter 180 to Chapter 135, and mainly looking at the difference, if any, in the language of 180 and 135, and also tried as best as possible to apply the general rules of statutory construction, where the first rule is that you look at the word, you look at the language, and also is the beginning of section 121, which governs all the definitions under the gun laws, 141 through 131X. Typical clause in there, as we've seen in the statutes, will say the purposes of the following sections or following chapter, these definitions apply here, unless the context otherwise indicates. So it was more of a general legislative history analysis through comparing and contrasting the old statute to the new statute.
You're talking about the statute in 2014,
I would back to
went back to
14
90.
and 98.
98,
Right.
but originally created gun control advisory board, which now we have a final.
Right, right. And I think that's where it was, I think it was 14, 98 with the original handgun laws. And this legislature, essentially, that section and other sections stripped that language. Took that language and ran it forward, didn't change it much. Left some words out, and a lot of the ones I picked up on, maybe others have focused on, but we've given some other examples of the statute. The word cylinder is used in the opposite. But if you, long guns have cylinders. A cylinder typically refers to a revolver. That coupled with the absence of receiver and just other language, I think we could reasonably infer that the legislature intended that the approved roster, firearm roster that recommended the Secretary only relates to this. So that's the research that I did. Chief, I think you did some additional or similar research.
Yeah, I think we're pretty much along the same lines. But when you talk about context, the feeling was firearm, you can't include everything in the firearm definition for the testing because given the testing that hasn't changed since 1998, there was no possible way to test frames or receivers. That didn't make any sense. Not testing stun guns, and then there were some prohibited items, whether they be assault style firearms, machine guns, or or sawed-off shotguns, which are listed under the definition of firearm. But not going to test things that are statutorily prohibited. So it was clear that not everything under the definition of firearm was supposed to be tested.
As far as the hand of the distributor earlier, certainly Ryan, since he drafted it, anybody else to take a look at them. Some of them are good examples, some are softer examples of context. The last one, for example, where the legislature intended to put the word firearm in there twice, but they talk about how under C you can transfer a firearm. Under an FID, you can only transfer one gun's non-large capacity, but then it ends with the above can transfer up to 4 firearms a year. So there's a little bit of confusion. But if you're reading the context, look, okay, firearm in that particular subsection for LTC holders means anything, but for FID card holders means one gun's non-semi. So it's sort of, the word even in the subsection means two different things. And I'm not saying that that's an error or inappropriate, but these things have to be read in context. So that, some of the other things, just other examples. I didn't go back to chapter 180. These are just some other examples I'll pick up. There might be other ones with other terms. That's not unusual in legislation.
Yeah, the law hasn't been codified since the Terse Centenary, just since 1900. Putting out the official act, so he goes back and checks.
Yeah, I don't know if you, if we have members of the public here, just remind people that we are purely an advisory body. We don't have the authority to do changes. Okay. Correct me, John, we advise the Secretary of Public Safety.
That's right. If you'd like, Jim, I can read the one paragraph relevant to that. It states that the board shall advise the Executive Office of Public Safety and Security on matters relating to the firearm control provisions of this chapter, including but not limited to consulting with the Executive Office of Public Safety and Security on the development of the firearm rosters outlined in section 131.75. The board shall also advise the Executive Office of Public Safety and Security on the training needs and materials for licensing authorities and licensees. Blah, blah, blah. The board members shall serve without compensation. The Executive Office of Public Safety and Security, in consultation with the board, shall adopt operating rules and procedures for its organization and activities. So, in that 131.75, where the rosters are governed, talks about the secretary having the ability to amend the rosters on his or her own initiative. So, that's for pointing that out.
Jeff, I just want to make that clear.
For the purposes of the public, as well as the the record, John, when you referred to chapter, it was chapter 135, and then when you were referring to 131, general law, chapter 140. Clear about that, so it works in Massachusetts.
One thing, just reviewing the roster memo additions, Judge, that you were discussing, that you put together, I don't know if the chair would like to consider essentially incorporating this into the actual memo, incorporating my reference or whatnot. Maybe that's something just for the record. Again, these become public documents, something that the board might consider making a motion to incorporate this into the memo the subcommittee put together.
I think it's a great idea, because it makes it, legislation, we have no clue what the intent was, so the more we can add to the record of the research together.
Yeah, no, I agree.
My only suggestion would be is somebody else take a look at least these four areas, make sure I might have been reading it.
I read them, Judge, it looks good, but do you want to maybe talk about them? Or-
Sure. The first one there, regarding 141-1C, I think it's the strongest sort of context. The transport laws, the vehicle, the storage laws, and there were some changes to 131C. But the part about carrying, so lawful licensed person can carry a loaded firearm in a vehicle as long as it's under direct control. And for time, loaded rifles, loaded shotguns. Look at the hunting laws. You can't have a loaded shotgun or a rifle in a vehicle. So in context, I think what the way I would read the first word firearm, carrying a firearm, is it needs a handgun. Just a little bit. The second thing that keeps in mind is what's the practicality of whether you're a passenger or certainly if you're a driver. How are you gonna carry a long gun or a shotgun in a motor vehicle? Besides the fact that you might pull over, I could go drive by.
Other people will find a way. Our people will find a way.
That's true. That's true. But I think that's another strong and good example where the word firearm in that particular section it wasn't intended to mean to contradict, for example, 131-63. Some lesser examples here, talking about the documentation of ammunition now, which is required. There's some language in there talking about rented or leased. It says firearms and ammunition, but we all know that you don't rent. You don't lease ammunition, you buy ammunition to use ammunition. We talked about the frame and receiver, part and the cylinder. I don't know if Chief, you had picked up on that when I read it the other day. The word cylinder is out. And we sort of put frame and cylinder side by side in the testing context with the absence of a receiver. It's just another example of what the legislature, by the language, they intended that these, drawing them from 1998, bringing them forward, not changing any of the language, that it's not unreasonable to infer that their intent was this firearm, the full firearm roster, is to relate only to guns. This is the other ones I think speak for themselves. So, and there could be others. I would like somebody to make sure that we have a playing field. Who's reading this text, because sometimes side by side you get 135, you chapter 140, trying to compare and contrast the misstep and time of the way
Did you have any thoughts as you were doing this? Ron actually mentioned it because the unfinished frame receiver is appointments in 23.
Yeah, because, well, our thought was that whether it's unfinished or finished frame, you can't, using the tests that are in there,
It's just not applicable.
it doesn't work.
So just to,
How can you do a grouping test on a receiver?
Or a drop test to see if it goes off when there's no.
well, it's not going to go off.
It's not gonna go off, so it's gonna pass that test, right?
I think that's also something we need at a future meeting to discuss frames and receivers in
Yeah.
like a larger
Finished and
context.
unfinished.
Exactly, because
Yeah.
we've been getting a lot of questions. I know you sent that question the other day too. It's like,
Yeah.
you know, can people continue to purchase frames and receivers for firearms that like aren't on the roster? You know, that type of thing.
Right.
Frames and receivers requirements. So.
I think, yeah, my question was a different one. It had to do with registration of frames
Right.
and receivers. So I think one of our first or second meetings, we had talked about frames and receivers on the roster, and I think this memo actually addresses all of that. So that they can't be on the roster.
At least for the purposes of approved firearms.
Exactly.
I don't know if we want to include that in this, just whenever we vote on it, the secretary, because it's the same thing as the roster. And then we can talk about frames and receivers and other it's complex.
I think we did include that. It's in the it mentions frames and receivers as one of the reasons why we think it only applies to basically pistols and revolvers, and not to all the other things that are definition of firearms.
John, would that be like putting regs, or would that just be guidance?
Say that again.
The, whatever we do with the long guns and
Yep.
the frames and receivers, would that actually be in the CMRs at some point? Or just be
Yeah, I think we could, yeah,
guidance? Maybe definitions.
yeah, exactly, right. I think we could do something with that in the definitions in the CMR.
Just to make it clear.
I mean, obviously, if you do the CMR, it has the force of law. If you do guidance policy, then it doesn't, so.
I noticed the other day when I was looking this up, like different definitions, even in the Attorney General's consumer protection, there's a separate definition for handgun. It actually uses the word handgun, and then it incorporates all the old language like shotgun less than 18 inches, rifle less than 16 inches.
That one. Thank you for all this information. So I think that we all need some time to digest this. So why don't we plan on, I don't know if the subcommittee is going to meet again. I know, Judge, you just said you wanted some extra eyes on your additional memo. I don't know if that's something that you want to discuss in subcommittee, and then the memo can be revised for the next meeting, perhaps. And obviously, we can all take a look as well. So would that make sense?
Well, individuals could review,
Okay.
then obviously, the three of us,
Yeah.
four
Yeah.
of us have seen the memo.
Yeah.
If we don't want to do that, these are stay, and we move on to the.
Yeah.
That's what,
Yeah.
what John.
Yeah.
And this is our document, we can add to it, right? I mean, you know, if we come up with new examples or whatever, yeah, it's a working document, absolutely. So I think as long as everyone agrees that we'll just, you know, we'll make this part of, you know, the memo, an attachment, but certainly, yeah, we can amend it, add to it.
Just move to the point where we finally vote on whatever. You do it in the form of a formal resolution with supporting documents, or
Yeah, I think we would, I think, ultimately we're going to ask the committee to make a vote on a recommendation to the secretary on this issue.
Good.
I anticipate that'll be on the agenda item for next month's meeting. I suppose part of that motion could be, you know, based on the memorandum, so it would all sort of be approved together, and that could be submitted on up. So yes, probably do it in one vote. If we wanted to vote to approve the memo and then vote on the recommendation, we can do that too. Really up to
yeah, that's all I'm saying. As we move through all of this stuff, should the votes be like a one paragraph formal resolution with supporting documents.
Yes, that's a good point. I think, at least in this case, I think, you kind of have the resolution, arguably. I think Ryan did a nice job keeping this fairly succinct. So I think this would probably serve that purpose.
Okay.
But I understand what you're saying,
Yeah.
moving forward. I would think, though, Michaela, I think, is going to talk about this and maybe asking the subcommittee to turn to our next issue. But I would think that part of, as we work our way through this, we might see more memos, on each of these issues, just because it's so complicated. It's really hard to just talk about it without sort of laying out your thoughts in an organized fashion. So we could, use those as sort of the resolutions, if you will. Again, just a suggestion, member.
Now, other questions. Yeah, I would probably lean towards accepting the memo and then making a recommendation to the secretary separately, but we can talk about that next month. So, all right, so then just a reminder for open meeting law, if anyone has any suggestions for the memo, send them to John directly, not the entire group, and he'll be able to consolidate those all. So, great. Thank you guys so much for all your work on this. It's been really excellent and helpful for us to see everything on paper and kind of make context of the bigger issue. So.
Well, it sounds like what we thought we were just being
I think the gang's still going to stay
Chair,
together.
You wish.
All right, so along those lines, why don't we move to the next item on our agenda? So our next big picture item that we had talked about at the first meeting was the creation of the assault style firearms roster, which is that prohibited firearms roster. I know there's been a lot of discussions, a lot of thoughts about that. So this is kind of where I was hoping maybe the subcommittee would, continue to stay intact. We can always swap out some members if we wanted to take a look at this in maybe like a larger context. But why don't we talk about this just in general right now? So one of the things that we have to do, the new portion of the law says that we have to create an assault style weapons roster, which is actually a ban roster, which is converse to what we currently have. So it's a completely different direction. So I know we had some initial discussions on this last month, but does the board have any thoughts on how to
Well,
start going
like I
around?
said last time, because it's inverted, it's not an approved roster, it's a banned roster. It's incredibly problematic to add to a banned roster. Whatever is posted initially, people is going to say, well, the gun I want's not on there, the retailer says I can sell it. And then 3 months later, we add to their roster. It's incredibly problematic, both in the legal sense and the perception sense, that now you're adding to a banned roster. It's not like you just refer to the approved roster, you can add forever. People are happy that we're adding. But once you post that initial roster, that's it.
I'm going to disagree with you and give you an example of why. The Gun Control Advisory Board first formed in 1999, one of our tasks was to produce large capacity weapons. So the reason for that at the time is because there used to be a Class A and a Class B license to carry. If you were going to have a Class B license to carry, you couldn't have anything that was on that roster. The roster wasn't updated continuously because at some point we realized this is like an endless task. I mean, every week you could be adding something new. What was done at that time was doing a lot of research. Captain Busa, Ollifinger, and myself looking at basically Gun Digest books from 94 earlier. Like, let's find everything that was ever marketed as large capacity. Well, particularly after 2004 when the federal ban went away, more kept coming on every single week. So there was no way to have like a list that addressed all of them. I mean, so we just stopped doing it. But I mean, you could have kept adding things forever. But I think on that roster it said just because it's not on here doesn't mean it's not large capacity. I think we put in the CMR here's the definition of large capacity. So if there's something that's not on the roster but meets his definition, it's still large capacity, meaning you need a Class A license to carry a habit. So my thought is you would have to do something similar with this. You'd have to make it clear on the roster, like, this is what we know of that came to the board's attention, but there's probably other things out there, and here's the definitions, by the way. If you have anything that meets this definition, whether it's on this roster or not, you're not supposed to have it.
Yeah, in 2014, we eliminated Class B.
Yeah.
That was confusing.
Yeah.
So I mean, yeah, the roster was never, that roster was never really helpful anyway, but the point is there was definitely things that were large capacities that never made it to that roster.
Yeah. This is a definitive.
Sorry, Ryan.
Go ahead, Ryan.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I think the chief's point is well taken, but the controlling document here isn't the roster itself, which is essentially a list of examples. It's the statute. It's the statute that defines what an assault style firearm is and what is prohibited. So just like in the original statute, there was a list of firearms that were banned, and then there was a list of features that needed to be considered. This roster can't possibly encapsulate everything that's out there and everything that's going to be produced in the future. The definition is the most important part of the roster is going to be just to help people easily figure out what meets those definitions and what doesn't.
Well,
But by necessity, it's going to have to be added to over time.
the other piece then is you're going to have to put up the dates that apply to that. Because really, there's no assault weapons that are completely banned in the state of Massachusetts. It depends upon when you possess them, where they were possessed, and whatever. But,
If
so
you have the original paperwork.
any roster is going to have to include all of that explanation for every gun you have. Because right now, I understand what Brian said, Chief is saying the same thing, people don't understand. They don't understand. Nobody understands the definitions.
I mean, I think there are probably, correct me if I'm wrong, but there are probably assault style firearms manufactured today or next week that we can clearly say nobody can have one. So there's some that an exemption date's not going to matter because they're produced from this date forward. You can't have them.
But anything produced prior to August 1st, you're going to have to list. Then you're going to have to list everything that's 2016 prior, then you're going to have to list everything before. So,
I don't know if we necessarily have to list what you said. I think we can put some disclaimers on the roster ultimately. I get your point, Jim, but at some point, we can't answer all the questions. The recommended the secretary answers all the questions. And the courts and the lawyers are going to have to sort of have it some point.
Well, because there could be guns, like you said, that were exempt initially, but somebody put some parts on there that all of a sudden makes it non-exempt. So there could be things not on the roster that we intentionally didn't put on the roster, but somebody put a collapsible stock or a flash suppressor, and all of a sudden it's illegal. So
you know where I'm coming from. What we are facing on a daily basis ever since this thing passed. And regardless of how many classes the chief mentioned, John, people have, retailers included, have no clue what they can sell and buy.
I think, you bring up a good point is that when we actually do the roster, maybe the most important point of that roster is an explanation before you get to the models. Like,
Yes.
If it's not on here, take a look at this. You can't have it if it says this.
Yeah, you almost need like a flow chart, just to make it
What's
easier.
those
Are you
charts?
talking about the assault roster or are you talking about the regular gun
Assault.
roster?
So,
Those
Just solve those.
Okay, yeah. It's like one of those waters.
Yeah, no, exactly.
So, but my concern is, I know concern is possible. When you put out official documents like the roster, they have to be first of all. If we put out, as the state puts out a roster that says, oh, before you look at this, you got to refer to this section of law, this section of law, understand all these subsections, people are just gonna go, no. So you wanna make it as crystal clear as you can for them, before you put out something. Because then in 3 months, somebody's purchased something they thought was totally legal and the retailer thought it was legal. That's what happened.
I think there's gotta be a way to say, if you own this in the Commonwealth on this date and it had these features, you're good, you know, with a LTC. If it didn't, you know, if you put additional features on there, then it's not okay. Or if you didn't own it in the Commonwealth, it came from somewhere else. I mean, so there's gotta be a way to take a look at the statute and kind of explain that out better than the statute did.
Well, the 3 dates are problematic, but also the fact that you, according to the law, you can't make an assault weapon not an assault. It states very clearly, once it's that, it's always that, regardless of how you change it. And that's problematic. Let's do it, so. But, hey, it's just one of the million things we're gonna have to try to wait for.
Well, it's problematic, but the reality is that some of the people that had that gun that are trying to make it legal weren't supposed to have it in the first place.
Well, you know, we can go into the history of everything that was done in the last 25 years and how clear all that was, but we don't have that much time.
We just have to remember, like, just to manage our own expectations. We're bound by the law. It is what it is. We have to do this roster. It's not discretionary. But to Jim's point, we really should strive to make it as clear as possible. But there's only so much we can do, right, within the bounds of the law. So, you know, whether that requires being creative, you know, as the chief mentioned, that's why I'm going to have the subcommittee look at this. But introductory language, pointing people to the right parts of the law. I would assume it would be easier for a member of the public to go to our roster that might be a couple pages long with very important information up top about, you know, areas of the law to look at, draw their attention to that, rather than giving them a 115-page act to sift through, which we all know how difficult it is to read that and understand it. So I think it's our mission to assist and help as much as we can in the confines of what we're dealing with the law here. But I hope we can make it better for people and dealers through that list, albeit it probably won't be perfect. But we always have the ability to go back and correct, redo. Nothing's set in stone. It's a roster. It's not even a regulation, meaning that we can do it on our own when we need to, when the secretary sees fit. You know, compared to even a CMR regulation, we have to go through the Secretary of State's office and the public hearing process, which are all, I think, largely beneficial for things like this. But I think that's important to keep in mind. We do have that authority, fortunately. So.
Yeah, it wasn't an easy thing to do. I mean, kudos to the chief. Chief and I were on the original gun control advisory board back in 1999. 25 years worth of work has been put into creating what is you have at this point. There's a lot of that.
And it's worked well.
Do you think before we do it separately or board, before you get into the adding, you know, what particular models, I think the most important work is figuring out what that preamble is going to be on the thing. How are you going to explain it to the dealers or the general public? Like, you know, can't have this. You know, even if it's not on this roster.
And also understanding their attention span.
Yeah, we need to make it as simple as possible. So those, I mean, I think those are probably the most questions that we get from dealers.
I think most dealers and your members probably have those questions right now. Even you taking a look at the statute, like, can I have this? I'm not really sure. Wouldn't it be great if it actually spelled that out?
Well, I mean, how many retailers thought it was perfectly fine to sell things and do that first? Go do that. So, thousands. But we can talk.
We're gonna have to lean on, I'm thinking, Jim, your constituency, we're gonna have to lean on you, and then I think law enforcement, state police as well. I think this is, the subcommittee is only gonna be able to do so much with this. I think this issue is going to involve much more back and forth and, bringing things from the subcommittee to the full committee over probably several meetings to try and get into a place that we're comfortable, we've done the best we can.
Are there any other states that we know of that have a ban roster or a ban list or something? That'd be something.
California.
I'm trying to think, California has approved rosters,
Right.
I'm sure.
We should look into it.
Yes.
Maryland might be something.
I don't think they
I don't think so.
The thing is, from the enforcement end of it, you have 3 different dates. You're asking for an advanced level of knowledge of firearms to be able to enforce it. I'm sorry, but you can't expect every single police officer out there to understand or know, like, we talk about the feature sheet and things like that. Like, it's going to be, the only way this is, there's not really like a possession thing in Massachusetts. If the person already owns it, whether they bought it in, 2012, 2015, whatever the date may be, it's really going to come down to, the only time this is ever going to come up is when it gets used as a crime and it ends up in front of the judicial system, where then the firearm gets seized, gets brought to some sort of crime lab or ballistics testing, things like that. The odds of the average police officer making a stop and understanding all of that stuff and trying to go through all that, it's very.
To be honest with you, the most of the time it's coming up right now is when the gun gets confiscated because of a restraining order or the license gets suspended for some other reason, and the guy says, "Hey, I bought that. Can I transfer it?" And the police department says, "You weren't supposed to have it. I don't."
Or it goes to a
I mean,
dealer,
there-
and the dealer will say, "Can I give this back to this guy?"
Right.
And it's just, yeah.
The 2016 was incredibly problematic, because as much as we tried to say, "Geez, that means something, that date means something," and because of the way it's worded, shall not mean this. And the way we try to explain to people is, it kind of says that, but it means that, yes, all of this shall be this. And boy, every time we try to talk about it, the internet just explodes about how come it.
But the 2016 date only applies to things that were used so-called mass compliant prior to that
Right.
date that didn't have the features. So and departments are still
But you're talking about the ban,
talking about numerous years where people thought they
Oh,
could
yeah,
have.
great points. I mean, there are guns not on the roster that people have owned.
No, we're talking about
Solid.
Oh, you're talking about assault. That's what I asked. He said, no, I'm talking about assault.
The problem is there are people that had assault weapons after 94, but before 2016, they had collapsible stocks and flash suppressors and thought,
Yeah.
hey, I got the okay because I had them before 2016. And so whatever preamble we come up with has to be clear, like, no, just because you owned it before 2016 isn't okay either.
Yeah.
It had to have like none of those, or not 2 or more of those features.
Yeah.
So it's a really complicated issue.
Yeah, because people are looking at the August 1st date as a hard stop for everything.
Well, that was, I think the statute codified what the AG's notice was. Roy, maybe you can speak on this, but the original one was the original notice was a little confusing because it kind of made it look like whatever you had, if you had it before July 2016, you could continue, but I'm pretty sure what that notice meant was if you had one of those so-called mass compliant ones that didn't have the 2 or more features, you were okay, but not everything. If it was a post-ban assault rifle, you weren't supposed to have it after 9/13/94.
But
This is not clear at all. So, all right. I mean, would the subcommittee have any issue with maybe keeping the band together and doing some work on this? I mean, I think you're right. I think the first thing we need to tackle are the dates, because I think that would make things a little bit clearer for us on how to kind of put the roster together.
Be happy to work with Judge and Ryan, at least on that initial part. And I think maybe other people can contribute when you get to the adding
Yeah, yeah.
part. But
Yeah, we can swap members in and out.
Yeah. If it's okay, I'll jump on that
Yeah.
subcommittee.
Sure.
Comes from us.
Sure. So why don't we have the initial, if you don't mind, Ryan, I feel like I'm volunteering you, Ryan, and you don't have a choice because you're on the computer, but, sorry. So why don't, if the initial subcommittee can maybe meet and, talk about the dates and what you would think about as like a preamble and trying to like simplify this for real retailers and the general public, and then we can talk about that at the next meeting.
Are you talking about the dates that you saw?
Correct.
Saw that?
Correct. And then we'll just go from there.
Do you want to put me on that?
So we can't put you on that because that gives us a quorum and that makes it a full board.
But we'll put you on the next one when we start. When we talk
thanks.
about no, when we talk about like at like the next phase of that.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, we can, right, we can sub it in and, right, reconfigure the sub.
Okay.
And like I
in
said,
fact, you could actually have a different subcommittee to go and improve that. Like, let's add these.
Yeah.
right, and then have the two subcommittees come back together and flesh it out with the full committee.
Right.
Which, like I said, I think is gonna be a back and forth. for
Yeah.
a bit.
I do too. Yeah.
So, absolutely.
Good. Sounds good.
Thank you, subcommittee.
Thank you.
We're keeping Judge Fabry busy, so he keeps bringing more snacks.
Now, I'm not a real full-time.
All
Maybe
right.
you'll find something there about the context, so.
Yeah, right? I mean, the more eyes, the better. But yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that's one of the most confusing things. And if we can create like a simplified context for people, retailers, general public, and law enforcement, it would be time well spent. So, all right. So the next item on the agenda, talk about EOPS roster regulations and next steps. And we touched on that just a bit. So.
Yeah, so obviously EOPS has a regulation governing the rosters that is going to have to be updated. I think, thinking about this a little bit more, it probably makes sense to address the CMR after we sort of make some progress on the rosters, right? So I think we're pretty far along now on the long gun issue. Next issue is the ban list, but to me, the CMR will essentially make law the requirements regarding rosters. And we still have an active regulation governing rosters, so to the extent none of that's been voided by the current law, there's I believe a severability clause at the end of that. That's still in effect, and so we have that out there, but I think that's sort of the way I've been thinking about it, but interested to hear what the members think. I don't think it makes any sense for us to update the CMR right now and then dive into these roster issues, because to update the CMR, as you all know, it's through the public comment process and promulgating, and then we'd have to come back and do the whole over again.
That's
So
6 months, we have no idea what
Yeah, I agree.
we're gonna.
So we put this on, we talked about it a little bit last week, but at least in my mind, it seems to me we should table that and sort of drill down on the roster issues, and then that would come after.
I agree. I don't want to touch that right.
No,
John, I'm assuming that taken to the CMR, we'll take the large capacity weapons roster out of that CMR.
Yeah.
Didn't want to, that get taken off the weapons.
I believe it's that. Take that down after the law.
Okay.
I don't know if it's appropriate to just touch on this here, but where we're still on rosters, that word use is still hanging out there. We gotta figure out what to do with that. Because that just caused the storm. Doesn't have, obviously, nothing has to be today, but at some point, you gotta try to figure out what to do with that.
It's only in that one place.
Yeah, but it means everything that's approved, so does it mean that even though I can live with whatever, I can't use it? So, it's not a one of the examples I got from a number of members was, if I end up using a handgun in self-defense, that's not on the roster, I got to prosecute because it says use. Anyway,
I think it's clear that the rosters only apply to what dealers can sell.
well, yeah, until you throw the word use in, because you're not going to regulate how retail uses it. So it's not at all.
But there's no related statute that criminalizes the act of using a gun that's not on the roster. So there would be no way to prosecute someone for that. That's correct.
Or even owning a gun that's not on the roster.
Right.
But it's something we can flesh out. Like I would think that whether that's appropriate for one of the rosters to point out, or whether it's appropriate for, EOPS to put out guidance on that, that comes from sort of this board's analysis of it. I think Ryan raises a good point, but that might be our avenue to point it out. But I think we all realized that right at the first meeting that that word wasn't in the old law.
And the fact, to expand on that, okay, what about a retailer that's renting a gun that's not on the roster? Because they have a fire. Is that what use is about?
Would make more sense.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's, again, just like the long gun stuff, right? We gotta figure out what this means. And is that, some of the retailers that actually are training courses, they use handguns that are not on the roster. There's a lot of stuff like that.
That's a good point. I think that's something obviously we'll need to address it, but just the manner of how we do that is.
Yeah.
But
And eventually, it could be
Yeah.
but not
yeah, I mean, it might be something we just put in the roster language, but yeah, all right, good. Good. All right, so we'll table that though. All right.
Yep.
All right, so anything else anyone wants to add regarding rosters or anything we've talked about up to this far?
Some point I think we have to less work in those target roster.
Yep.
So we have.
Even if we just like usify,
Yes.
let's recommend it go forward.
Okay.
So,
It's low on the roll.
That's
the
good.
priority.
Yeah.
Because we'll not do
What did didn't we take a vote in one of the last meetings where we voted to approve it's called the handgun roster, right? The
Continuation.
continuation, we did that, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
We can do that at the next meeting with regard to the Olympic roster and the target roster, just so that it's very clear. We haven't put any guidance out on that either yet, but at least we can do that at the next. I don't want to do it today because it's not on the agenda, but we could do it at the next meeting just to, and then, as you said, Chief, we will have to address it, but at least until we get to it, it's there, it exists, and we can continue with it. Does anyone see any issues with that?
No, I mean, the reality is the Olympic roster, there hasn't been any submitted in addition for many years, but the formal target roster gets updated frequently because it's a way where if the gun is manufactured and sold primarily or exclusively for formal target competition, they don't have to do the testing thing. So that's been, the board gets notices.
Yeah. We've done something.
Yes, we have.
If we bring to the line of interesting issue, like I said, picking up on.
Well, that's what I wanted to clarify, that the other lawsuit should not include language.
Right.
Because the term firearm is used there
Yeah,
now.
as well.
And the term firearm now means.
Right.
Three of these, but that actually might be, I don't know, Ryan, if you can take a look at it, I'll take a look at it as well. Is that another example where, what we use the word firearm with that roster, but clearly it wasn't intended to be a long gun, included one. Because if it was, and if, the secretary or like some people in the legislature said, well, we did mean to include all firearms. Does that mean that somebody could not come forward and petition to say, I want this one, then put on that?
That actually came up in an interesting
And
fashion.
I'm just, I'm not advocating,
Uh,
again, it just seems to be a-
But that there are ARs that are sold specifically for international and national competition that could meet the target.
So here's something to think about. The reason that those two rosters exist and were put in the statute was so companies didn't have to test their handguns. So it wasn't to have, like, we absolutely need a new list. It was because we decided, hey, there's some handguns designed for formal competition that couldn't pass those testing requirements. So it wasn't because we needed more guns on a different roster. It was because it all started with the testing stuff that was just for hand. There's a workaround. So I think it's clear for the hand show.
I think that's good. I think why don't we put that on the agenda for next meeting?
Good.
Alright, great. Alright, so next, any other comments on that? Alright, so next order of business, discussion of future meeting dates. That one's set up for February, yep, which is February 14th.
Valentine's Day, that's definitely a different thing.
Do we want to set up a meeting for,
17.
it's,
14.
14th? Yeah, 17th is a holiday.
Yep.
Probably not in March, but as the weather improves, are we gonna consider remote meetings? Getting around the state of it?
I think we can discuss that at future meetings. I know we really wanted to meet in person for the first couple months, just.
No, I mean, the whole board.
Changing.
Change
Oh,
your
the,
location.
oh, yeah, oh, yeah, we can do that.
Go to a gun club, Fish and Wildlife Board.
Absolutely.
Sure.
Fish and
Yeah,
Wildlife.
the office.
Much, if you ever seen it.
Yeah. We have, you know, I could always arrange, you know, NPTC academies as well, which are, you know, for up as far out as Holyoke. So, yeah, absolutely. But no, that's
You wanna do March 14th? Friday.
I believe that's fine. Yeah.
Okay.
So we'll do March 14th, same time, same place, yeah.
Same
And if we
time.
want to talk about
Back.
a different location for the April meeting, that's great.
Yeah, I mean, I would get to it, but.
Sure. Yeah, good. Alright, so we'll schedule that. Victoria will send out a calendar for March 14th. Oh, yeah, sorry. Yep, alright, sorry, I skipped ahead to the meeting dates because I already checked it off. I shouldn't have. So, roster addition applications, we haven't, I got to Barry early this morning, so we'll wait on those for next month. They were just functional design equivalents. And then I know we did have some inquiries from additional people who we're going to be submitting, so
We did get a couple of questions, where do they go? Yeah.
they can go to me, they can go to me, yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
All right.
For what it's worth, I had told the labs, I didn't hear anything that wasn't at least a week in advance because I needed to get it.
Yep.
So they knew if they sent it in that morning.
Yep.
Hear it from next month.
put it on the agenda. So everyone knows.
Yeah.
So these are, again.
Yep.
These are citizen individual businesses that come forward and propose an addition.
So these are either the labs who are doing it on behalf of the manufacturer, or in some cases, they're functional design equivalents. Those come from the labs too. So
Well, John, that's kind of changed.
Well, no, I know what you're going to say because I was going to mention it too. I mean, a citizen can petition, obviously, but and correct me if I'm wrong, but the process that was set up through the CMR was through the independent
Right.
laboratories, right? So I think the citizen would have to follow that process, but certainly the law did then and still allows for that to happen, to petition the secretary for additions on the rosters. But you're going to have to follow the process.
that's one of the conversations we've had, is that the CMRs apply now, because the law has changed so drastically, where the secretary has full authority to change, add, subtract from the roster.
He did before them too. That language was exactly the same. I mean, we weren't doing that for a lot of different reasons, I think.
Because the citizen thing has to be.
Yeah, and we're gonna update that soon.
Yeah,
I think the
we
one
can
citizen,
talk about that.
the entire time we did it, we had one citizen do the formal target competition.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But he had to go get all the marketing stuff, he
Yeah.
had to do everything
Yep.
anyone else would
And that one's easy. I mean, that's obviously easier
Yes.
than the regular testing. Some five guns, but
Do we have a web page up for all this stuff now? For what it takes?
it's kind of. I think it is on the website. It's a little bit piecemeal, so I'm thinking we at some
We were
point.
talking about an FCAP
Yeah.
site, like,
Yeah.
that you can access through EOPS and the CGS probably.
Yeah, it'd be nice to just say, oh, here.
We can do that.
Yeah.
Something simple.
Put all the meeting minutes,
Yeah.
we've done that for other boards, meeting minutes, notices,
I mean, in the
agendas,
meantime, like-
rosters.
Like
I
I
applied for a roster.
had an email the other day, I just forwarded it all to Michaela.
Okay.
So Judge, just for like history, so we generally get like 2 or 3 types of roster addition requests from the labs. It's either it depends.
There was times when we would
A
have
lot,
15 of them, and there's other times you might have 1 or 2
Yeah.
per meeting. You know, we weren't having,
Yeah, we were like quarterly, so.
you know, initially back in early 2000s, there were times when we were getting 50 at a time. But then it got to the point that pretty much the only thing that needed to be tested was the brand new stuff. So, you know, a company would say, hey, we got these new 3 models out. So generally every meeting, we had probably at least half a dozen for most meetings.
Process is the same.
Process would be the same.
So typically what we did, you know, can set it up how she wants, but the way we did it before was I got the reports and we shared them at the meetings. And my position had always been the state approved the lab, so I'm not second guessing the lab. So all we were doing was making sure the reports were filled out completely, making sure all the paperwork was in order. We didn't want to be in a position of saying, no, I think the lab didn't do a good testing job because the state approved the lab.
How many times do we have that person submit a target gun? And it has to be marketed and everything else. They showed us pictures of SWAT teams, you know, which is kind of, it's like,
Yeah, you couldn't,
I guess it's a target.
it had to be like exclusively target, you couldn't have like shooting rabbits or whatever else.
But also the functional design equipment really specs that.
Yes,
Yeah, so what we get is we generally get like the full testing report, which is for new handguns that a manufacturer has submitted for testing. And then we have the functional design equivalent, which is essentially just the lab attesting that this is a functional design equivalent of a handgun.
it could be the,
It's already been.
Correct, correct.
well, it
And
could be
then-
the exact same handgun that has a different finish on it, or it could be a smaller caliber. There's conditions in the CMR that's what is and what isn't okay.
And then the target guns, if they're submitted, is generally by the manufacturer because they just submit their marketing materials and they don't get tested. So,
But that was all a gradual process over the years.
so we'll start doing those next month. Like I said, I've got 2 functional design equivalents. I think we'll have at least 1 other that we know of that will come next month. But
They would approve, you know, whatever, 10 additions to the roster, and then I would take that and the secretary would,
We recommend.
Yep,
document
yep,
dates,
exactly,
yep.
which she would, you know,
Yep.
or she would. And then, once that's done, the roster is updated officially, posted online with the updated roster. But, and I would see, I mean, there were times where like, they'd be missing paperwork, right? And she would reach out and say, hey, you gotta do this, or I remember getting stuff from like, I don't know if it was like Google certified stuff that was just like, this is not gonna cut it, you know, whatever the requirements were. And so that, you know, I think the board served as a good filter
They
there.
used to sit there with their phones and look up.
yeah,
Yeah,
You know,
right.
it's like, no, but,
yeah.
I don't know if it'd be helpful for the new members of the board, maybe send them some examples of testing stuff so we can get familiar with it.
Yeah. And that's what we're gonna do. And then we we used to just review them at the meeting, but we'll make sure that going forward, because we have electronic board packets now, we're gonna send those with the board packages, so you'll have them ahead of time to review.
We have so much to do now
Yeah.
on the board that we think it'll just help expedite the process a little bit.
Yeah, that's almost a right.
Well, at this point,
It's important.
So I don't know if you thought about this, but one of the problems that I have bringing this stuff to the board for a while, particularly during the pandemic, they were doing just electronics, and it would require me to print out like 300 pages of test reports. So I told them I had all the test labs, do it electronically, so I had it on file, plus send a hard copy. So, yep, I got that kind of figured
I
out.
can print at this state. You don't have to worry about using your desk.
Yeah, it just it gets to be a pain.
I know it is.
But-
Yeah. So it's good, but yeah. But then you don't have to print everything out either. So, right.
Especially when you're $50,000.
Right. All right, wonderful. All right, cool. So we'll start doing those again next month. All right, so next item, is there, do we have a discussion of any items not reasonably anticipated? Everybody's done something.
like that, I don't have anything else.
And one other thing, reading our charge. I think at the end it says we have to adopt rules and regulations process. Like I wasn't at the first meeting, so I don't know if you did that.
Nope.
We need to do that, I would think at the very least. Well, obviously, it's more, but I won't use all of this,
Yeah.
just fine.
We haven't done anything formally. I think we talked in general at the first meeting and then.
Yeah.
Yeah, not a priority.
Yeah, but,
The roster.
but it is something, I mean, it's say shall, so we should,
I think that's a good opportunity too to kind of solidify a process. It can be a little bit loosey-goosey, like, you know, where do they send the reports, you know, that type of thing. So I think it's a good opportunity to look at the process.
Is the board going to be involved in
I say we put Jim into the subcommittee one.
the registration
Oh, nice.
serialization process? Or
That's
the,
the only
We talked about that, like bringing the registration serialization and like reviewing it.
yeah, I think we were gonna, I think what we said was, so obviously we have to do regulations. So it's gonna be a public comment period. We'll make sure, you know, personally provide those the drafts of the regulations for both to the board members as interested parties. We have to do that anyway. But we make sure each member gets those to review, and then I think there's an opportunity to submit comments formally, informally through the public comment process. But I think the lion's share of that to the agencies
You just got a template you use
for the
for the boards.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and, but for the board's, edification, that process, we have made a lot of progress in drafting regulations. So, we have a statutory deadline of April to promulgate serialization. Yeah, this April. So we're just doing the best we can to meet that deadline or come close to meeting the deadline. But I expect in the next month or so, we will have draft regulations to disseminate to you as board members to review and the public.
so I had talked to Kelly about this the other day. So in the meantime, until that's up and running, status quo, like the frames and receivers, they're not registered.
Right, status quo right now. Unfortunately, the legislature gave us 6 months for regulations, 18 months for the system, and then a year thereafter for compliance with the system. I actually thought that was a very smart way to go about that.
Is there a way to, in the next guidance piece, to just make it crystal clear that that mandate is not in place?
Yes, I think, did we do
It's
that?
in there. It's in there.
Okay, if not, we'll make sure,
Yeah.
yes. Because that guidance, it's cumulative, so we're just adding to it, so if it's there, it'll be there when it goes out again, and if not, we'll add it.
They've had a lot of
frames.
Okay.
But I call it keyword amendment, whatever you want to call it. Well, yeah, the state doesn't have to put it in place for 18 months or whatever.
Yeah.
But the mandate's there.
Okay, we'll do that.
Yeah, there's a couple things we need to add anyway. So
Okay, cool.
Yeah, good suggestion.
Well, I sort of agree with the training, it has to be done, but until it gets done.
Yeah.
Right.
It really isn't applicable, it's
Right.
applicable right now.
Yeah, my mission with some of this stuff is just to make it clear.
Sure.
But leave it in guesswork as people can. Not that you get involved.
None.
Um,
I'm looking at the guidance right now, and it says that you will not be required to register your firearm into the new registration system until 10/2/26. It also says if you've already registered your firearms through the current transaction portal, you won't have to re-register. So the guidance is out there.
Okay, thanks, Ryan.
Thanks. I can remember that.
And that, I think that, I know the sort of enabling section of the English statute.
Yes.
Sort of use that.
Right.
And saying.
Yeah.
The ops has until X, Y, Z.
Yes.
So,
Yeah,
But it's a little confusing because somebody that purchases a gun, not necessarily a frame, has to register it today, even though that the new system is there. They have to register it under the old system. Right?
Yeah, what?
Well, because the new language says that both parties have to do the registration.
I'm
Is
saying,
that what
if
you're
you went to a
referring
dealer and you bought a gun, it gets registered, even though the new system isn't up to
Right, well, the dealer uses uses Mercs to
Right.
do that.
And currently, if somebody's doing a private transfer, they do it, they go on the web portal like
Right.
they did. So, but I guess my point is, somebody could misread this and think I don't have to do any registrations until the new system is up, and that's not true. They have to register under the old system.
That
right now.
actually, that is a good point. We have had some people mention that, so maybe we put that in the guidance, like make that clear that there still should be registering their transactions. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you can hold it.
Yeah.
Because I've had that comment too.
Yeah.
Hey, no, so they, get a hold of them, I don't have to register this for a year.
Okay. All right. So next order, I just member comments. I'll just go around the room, and if anyone has anything they want to talk about that they haven't already. You ready to eat?
No, not me, everybody else.
Everybody, yes. I can wait.
Including the members of the public.
Wonderful.
Good deal on that, members' comments. Obviously, everybody in this public. We have people on the Fish and Wildlife Board.
Yep.
And orders came down from the governor's office. There was no comments from board members to be conducted without prior approval. I don't know if that applies to everything.
I don't.
Okay. I'm good. I just want to make sure.
You guys are all here for.
Maybe Fish and Wildlife Board did one.
Anything you want to say?
No.
You sure?
Yeah. I was just saying, I was just like, wow, that's good. No, I don't think I have anything.
Chief? No. Stick with it. Jim?
The only thing I was asking Woody for consideration at some point is the pepper spray sale thing. Because you have to have a retailer's license to sell pepper spray.
Yep.
But there's a lot of women instructors out there that used to do anti-domestic violence stuff,
Oh,
and they would
sure.
sell their students
Yep.
pepper spray with the glass.
Yeah.
So it's very restrictive, and a lot of those people, at least this is the way it's explained, probably not gonna go to a gun shop. So, because as long as you didn't have to have a brick and mortar to have the license, and that's what they offer.
Right. Oh my gosh, that's fun. Yeah, I mean, there's, for what it's worth, you know, about, you know, you can go like to sporting goods, maybe not as, you know, intimidating as like going into a gun shop, and a lot of the sporting goods stores have them. Walmart has it, so. But still, yeah, that's.
But it was handy for them to.
Yeah, of
Yeah.
course.
But just something to think
Yeah.
about.
Okay, yeah. Put it on the list. Ryan, anything?
Nothing, thanks.
Wonderful. All right.
You need an Irish coffee.
We all do. I can take any comments from the general public right now. Anyone has anything to say? No. Right? No? Wonderful. All right. right, well, if there's nothing else, then I think we can adjourn. Do I have a motion to
So
adjourn?
moved.
All right, do I have a second?
You don't need a second.
I don't-
Rob,
Under Rob, all right, wonderful.
Motion to adjourn. Needs no second.
Well, thank you for,
that's
thanks
right.
for telling me that. I'm gonna take a second anyway.
This
Um,
was much better. Last Saturday in Dallas.
Yeah, that's right.
Meeting lasted $15.
Thanks, Rob.
all in favor of adjourning,
Ah.
11:39.
Oh.
You're taking a deep breath.